We do a lot of reading and YouTube video watching and seminar attending and retreat attending. So most people are filled up with a solid amount of metaphysical knowledge and have a decent level of wisdom. But what seems to be hugely lacking, at least in the West, is all I can speak to, is the self-love component. And so I tend to stress the self-love, self-acceptance more in my teachings because it seems to be more needed in our culture today. And it all begins and ends for me with the emotional guidance system, which is this understanding that your emotions are, you've heard people say, well, you can't trust your emotions because your emotions can lead you astray, right? And it couldn't be further from the truth because your emotions are actually always leading you back to the truth and letting you know when you've gone astray. It's just that we don't understand our emotions and the way that they communicate with us. And so we think that the ego makes us believe that a negative emotion is the evidence that a negative thought is true.
Aaron Abke, you grew up as a pastor's kid, and I'm curious for you to start this conversation. What were some of the scripts, stories, and beliefs that you grew up with that kind of carved out the person that you used to be?
Fun question. The first script is definitely the idea that I'm inherently a sinner, born corrupt, born with evil inside of me, and I need a blood sacrifice to atone for my sins. It's hard to put into words like how impactful that belief is and how it filters into everything you think, perceive, and do and feel throughout your adolescence. But that belief definitely shaped me in a huge way. And I think there was some good to it. Obviously, it was what my soul wanted to experience when I incarnated. And it served a great purpose and it led to my eventual awakening. But I can't say it didn't take, a better part of a decade to deprogram a lot of that dogma.
Yeah, in your early 20s, it was like the kind of point in time where you were like breaking your idea of what life was and everything that it entailed. Losing friends, losing your job, losing so much at that period of time. Take me through your internal narrative of just like releasing your idea of what life is entirely.
Well, gosh, man, it was just such an inversion of everything I once believed because, again, I grew up with this really strong devotion to my Christian faith and was a very devout Christian. And so becoming disillusioned from the Christian God at like 23 and finally admitting to myself and admitting publicly that I don't believe in this version of God anymore. I don't want anything to do with the Christian culture or world anymore. It was kind of like starting your life all over again. If anyone has left a cult before or experienced being in a cult, then you can understand. Or, if you grew up religious like I did and you had to break away from that, a lot of people do it quietly because they don't want to face the backlash that comes with that. Yeah. But I didn't really have a lot of a choice to do it quietly, being a pastor's kid and being very much in the Christian spotlight most of my life. And just, I didn't even know anybody that wasn't Christian. So I knew I had to face up to this total rejection of my former life and self. And that's really what took me so long to break away from my religion, because by 18 years old, I was asking all these questions of like, this stuff over here doesn't make sense to me, and getting very dissatisfying answers from pastors. And so like, if I hadn't had that fear of being ostracized from everyone and everything I knew, I probably would have jumped ship a couple years earlier. So it took a while to build up that courage to make that leap of faith.
Yeah, I think the curiosity is what allowed you to step into the work that you're doing today. And I'd love to ask, like, how do you even explain what you do to people? Because I could assume that's difficult for the average person to understand.
Yeah, I get that question a lot on planes and meeting strangers. And what I usually say is I try to put it in a way that somebody who may not be on a spiritual path can understand in layman's terms. So I'll say I teach courses on mindfulness, meditation, inner healing, basic spirituality. And usually people nod and, oh, okay, cool. A lot of times there's a confused look of, oh, okay, well, tell me more about that. And they really don't know. They really don't know that there are courses online for that kind of stuff. It's a new world to them. But every once in a while, it'll be somebody who is on a conscious path and they get lit up about it and they want to go deeper. So yeah, if someone listening is on a spiritual path, I would define myself as a spiritual student who sometimes teaches. And I'm passionate about many different spiritual modalities and texts, such as the Law of One, A Course in Miracles, Hinduism, Buddhism, and most especially Christian mysticism and Essenism.
Yeah, I want to dive into all of that. I want to start with where it started from for you. And it seems like it was kind of like the lunch breaks listening to Eckhart Tolle that opened your mind up to more questioning from, even though earlier on in your life you had a lot of questioning, but that opened it even more. What did that kind of do to you, and what did that expand into? What was the first thing that you jumped into after starting listening to him?
So Eckhart was the first spiritual teacher outside of Christianity I ever listened to. And it was the Oprah Winfrey series on A New Earth back in 2008. And it's kind of funny to watch it now. I've probably watched that series like 10 times over the years, but it was when Skype first came out. And so Oprah and Eckhart are doing this kind of like typical Oprah Winfrey book show type of conversation. And then they're bringing in guests from around the world through video camera. And Oprah's just like freaking out about how cool it is that there's people on the video from their homes. She's like, this is just amazing that you're at your home in Chicago and we're over here in New York and we're both talking to each other. And it's like, that was just in 2008. It's not that long ago, but technology moves quick, you know? So I started listening to that series, that book series, and then reading the book. And it resonated so much with me, especially just the idea that we are consciousness and that can't be argued with. Even as a Christian, I could not argue with the fact that I am awareness. It seemed like this simple fact that I thought, how could nobody have told me this before now? No, this is such an important fact of my being, and I've never even heard this idea before. But it immediately puts religion in a new light and a new context, because if you know yourself as consciousness or awareness, then suddenly questions like, okay, so does my physical body need saving? You know, do my physical sins, does consciousness or awareness need saving from physical sins? You know, through some kind of blood sacrifice? All of a sudden, it was a very questionable narrative. But as a Christian, when I was taught and believed I am my physical body and nothing more than that, and it's my physical body that needs saving, because it's my physical body that will be either thrown into hell or ascended up to heaven, and I'll live in this exact physical body forever. You know, that's a very different paradigm. So Eckhart opened my world to the nature of consciousness and awareness. And really what the 2-week experience you referred to did for me the most was it gave me two really important kind of qualities for enlightenment, which is number one, a unwavering conviction that enlightenment is a real state of consciousness that's absolutely available. It's not a pie in the sky, wishful thinking kind of pipe dream. It is an absolutely real state that anyone can access if they truly desire it. After spending 2 weeks in that state, unbroken, I could not argue with the fact that enlightenment isn't just a pipe dream. It's totally available. And it's, you know, it's a very advanced state that has to be earned through a lot of spiritual discipline and practice. But it's like once you are fully convinced that it is real, everything else just kind of goes by the wayside. Once you've tasted that heavenly state, nothing else can satisfy you. Everything else just grows strangely dim in comparison. And so that was the huge gift that 2-week experience gave to me. And then number two, so first is the belief that it's real, the total conviction that it's available. And then number two is the disillusionment with the material world and the kind of like burning passion and discipline required to do whatever it takes to get back to that state, to back engineer my mind back into that state that I had tasted for 2 weeks. You know, it was a long enough experience that I could remember it and I could sort of glimpse it again when I wanted to and taste it a little bit. And usually what happens is people have those mystical moments for like 30 seconds, 2 minutes, an hour at best. It's very rare that that kind of state lasts for more than even a day or two. And so to have 2 full weeks in that state was a huge gift from the universe, because it gave me the ability to go back in my memory and access, like, what was that state of consciousness like? Why was I so at peace? Why was I so happy? Why did I feel so connected to everything? And through those introspections, I was able to get back there a lot sooner than probably would have been if I had never tasted it before. So that 2 week experience was absolutely the pivotal, life-changing moment of my life and incarnation. And after 2 or 3 years of just intense devotion to those practices, I began making YouTube videos and teaching these principles online just out of my own passion, with no interest in like being a YouTuber or a spiritual teacher. I just thought, hey, I've learned these things that have helped me so much. I bet it'll help a few more people online. I'll make some videos. And to my surprise, here we are today.
I will say that I resonate deeply with Eckhart Tolle, and A New Earth was one book that for me that I kind of thought similar, where it was like, why have I not learned this? I feel like this is the most important thing I've ever learned in my entire life, and it came from something that I had to find myself. And
Mm-hmm.
it's crazy that it comes that way, but something that you talk often about that I feel we have a lot of resistance to is that we all create our reality and we choose our states of being. But most of the time that isn't really conscious. So what do you mean by that?
Well, one of the things that has really shaped my teachings is the understanding of the I am principle,
Mhm.
that God is the first person in the present tense. I am. And there is no God outside of I am. There is no past God. There is no future God. There's only now, eternal existence here and now. And so when you start to grasp the significance of that, you can connect with your own I am principle and begin understanding the true power that you possess and can wield if you know how to wield it. The problem is everyone's wielding it unconsciously,
Yeah.
and they don't understand how powerful their thoughts are. Um, there's a passage in the Essene Gospel of Peace where Jesus describes the power of thoughts. And he says something like, "Do you not know, O sons of light, that your thoughts have the power to split the mighty oak tree asunder like the lightning bolt from the heavens?" And he goes on to these powerful descriptions of thoughts and trying to paint this picture, right? That your thoughts are every bit as powerful as that, but they work on a subtler level than a lightning bolt, splitting a tree in half. And so if every thought you thought of could split a tree in half in front of you, you would immediately know how powerful your thoughts are, and you would instantly start using your thoughts in a very conscious and mindful way. And so the universe has designed our experience to be way more subtle than that, so that it forces our consciousness to evolve and to look deeper and to expand our awareness, because it's not so easy to recognize the power of our thoughts. So the average person is thinking thoughts all day long about who they are, who they believe they are, what they believe is possible. And through the I am power, which is the God power, the God presence in all of us, they are qualifying their mind, their mental energy in all these negative ways that limit their experience of reality. And so really your I am is just the power of your own belief, because again, you are the I am. It's not like you possess the I am. It's indistinguishable from you, right? There's no separation. You are the I am itself. So whatever you believe, whatever you think is where you're directing that I am power, and it will produce in its own likeness whatever you're thinking about. So life begins to change dramatically when you understand the power of your thoughts and you start to take a lot of mindfulness about what thoughts you give attention to, what thoughts you allow into your inner world, and what thoughts you banish from your inner world and choose to ignore because you don't want to create realities in their likeness. So it's really just basic self-awareness in one sense of, are you watching your thoughts? Are you, as the Bible says, taking every thought captive and saying, wait a minute, is this thought useful and beneficial to me? If not, then I'm going to negate it and unqualify it. I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to give it no space of my attention any longer. We have a default mode, right, called the ego, that is always thinking and trying to pull our attention towards negative thoughts, because the ego is a negatively polarized thought structure in the mind. It seeks the negative, which is the self-facing, inward-facing kind of thoughts. It's all about me. It's all about what I want. How can I get some pleasure? And the ego's pulling you in that direction. And the problem is that direction is inherently based in lack, seeks after attachments, tries to take control over life. All of these inherently negative attitudes is what permeates ego consciousness. And that's the default mode network of 99% of humans. And so when all your thoughts are self-focused, self-centered, let's say, on the personal self, you become disconnected from the universal self that you are. You become disconnected from the universe around you and your relationship to it. And so one of the most powerful ways to requalify your mental energy is to stop seeking personal gratification and self-centeredness as your means of living, your way of happiness, but actually to look outwards and to look to give and to share love and happiness with others, because you are the whole universe. And so whatever you give must increase inside of you, because you can't give to something that you're not one with, right? You're one with everything. So as I bless others, I bless myself, and my frequency picks up. My thoughts become more positive, more radiant, more unified with the whole. And so there's different mechanics like that that I like to teach in terms of requalifying thoughts, but it all begins and ends with understanding the I am power that we possess and becoming very sensitive to the ways that you're using that power in your mind.
Yeah, it really is. We label ourselves and we judge ourselves. Like you say, you darken your consciousness when you judge yourself, but we do it not knowingly all the time because we're not being so self-aware. We're not thinking about what we're saying. We're just saying because we're used to it. And
Right.
talking on what you just said, I love this quote that you've said, and I think it came from A Course of Miracles, is only what I have not given can ever be lacking. And I love that quote so deeply because it really goes back to the extent that whatever you're looking for outside of you can only come from within yourself, right? If you're looking for love, you have to give it to yourself first. And we're always looking outside of ourselves. When clients come to start working with you and they're really trying to put this into action in real life, what are some of the first things that you kind of work with people on?
So I'm really big on something called the three disciplines of the personality from the Law of
Mm,
One. And those disciplines are know thyself, which is self awareness,
mhm.
accept thyself, which is self love. And when you combine those two principles together, the masculine and feminine together is power, creates power. And so the third discipline, which is the extension of the first two in combination, is become the creator. And that's the I am power, stepping into the I am power and creating your reality consciously rather than unconsciously. And so if you don't have wisdom and love, you don't have power yet. You're walking on one leg, so to speak, right? So it's about how to use or infuse wisdom with wisdom with love to create power, to step into your power as the creator. And so really for me, I find that the spiritual community tends to have a lot of wisdom, a lot of collected knowledge. We do a lot of reading and YouTube video watching and
Yep.
seminar attending and retreat attending. So most people are filled up with a solid amount of metaphysical knowledge and have a decent level of wisdom. But what seems to be hugely lacking, at least in the West, is all I
Yeah.
can speak to, is the self love component. And so I tend to stress the self love, self acceptance more in my teachings because it seems to be more needed in our culture today. And it all begins and ends for me with the emotional guidance system, which is this understanding that your emotions are, you've heard people say, well, you can't trust your emotions because your emotions can lead you astray, right?
Yeah.
And it couldn't be further from the truth because your emotions are actually always leading you back to the truth and letting you know when you've gone astray. It's just that we don't understand our emotions
Mm.
and the way that they communicate with us. And so we think that the ego makes us believe that a negative emotion is the evidence that a negative thought is true. So a loved one passes, a pet passes, and you're thinking the thought, oh, my pet died and now I've lost them. And you feel sad. And the mind says, yes, it's true. You really have lost them. They really are dead because look, you feel sad about it. So it must be true. And
Yep.
so we suffer. But the game changing revelation of emotions is that negative emotions are actually like warnings from your inner being that you're thinking out of alignment with truth. So I've used like the analogy of the bumpers on a bowling lane. If you've
Hmm.
ever gone to a bowling alley and they have those bumpers, or you remember that old game, the doctor game where you had the tweezers and you would
Yes.
operation,
Yes. Yes.
operation, and you try to grab the bone out of the hole without touching the metal part, and if you do, it goes bang and it buzzes.
Yep.
Your negative emotions are like that. They're the buzzers that are trying to warn you, hey, you're thinking out of alignment with truth right now. You're thinking in such a way that reality does not think. You're perceiving yourself in a way that reality does not perceive you. So if you believe that you are lacking anything, reality disagrees with you. It says, nope, you are lacking nothing. You are infinite abundance itself. You lack no good or perfect thing. And so a negative emotion will appear in your inner being to respond to that errant thinking to let you know you've gone astray. So not only do your emotions not lead you astray, they tell you when you're already astray in your thinking, and they try to course correct you. And so the way that I kind of break the emotional guidance system down is into the three basic negative emotions.
Mhm.
And this is something I teach called the three beliefs of the ego. That
Just gonna
there's,
jump to that. Yeah,
there we go,
love
synchronicity.
it.
That there's only three beliefs the ego has. This is the metaphysical framework of the ego. This is what it's made up of. It's just a bag of beliefs, and it's three beliefs in particular. And thankfully, our three negative emotions let us know which one of those beliefs is operating in the mind. So the three negative emotions that we have are sadness, anger, and fear. And there's many flavors and variations of those emotions, but we can boil any negative emotion down to one of those three beliefs or feelings: sadness, anger, or fear. And those three feelings signal the three beliefs. So the first belief of the ego is the belief in lack, which we just touched on. Anytime I believe I've lost something or I am lacking something, I will feel sad about it in some way. I'll feel depressed. I'll feel hopeless, shameful, some kind of sadness-based emotion. So sadness is letting me know you're believing in lack, and lack is false. Lack is not true in the universe. The second belief is basically the attachment to outcomes. It's the belief that I can fulfill my lack. I can fill this aching void inside of myself by going out into the world and winning pleasurable outcomes, right? That girl or that guy, that money, that job, that car, that business, that fame, that fortune, something outside of me has what I'm looking for. That's the second belief. And that belief, which is the cause of all attachment, will produce anger. Anytime an attachment is blocked or somebody gets in the way of it or takes it from you or anything of that nature, the emotion of anger is produced in the emotional body. And anger is, the ego tries to use anger as a vehicle to like smash through that obstacle and do whatever it takes to get my outcome that I want. But really what anger is like that touching a hot stove, right? When you touch it, it burns you and it hurts because your body's saying, hey, don't touch that. That's damaging. That's harmful. In the same way, to be attached to an outcome for my happiness is very harmful to my spiritual well-being. And so anger is trying to signal to me, you have an attachment. You have placed some kind of outcome on a pedestal, and now that outcome is coming to bite you back. So that's the second belief, which is signaled by anger. The third belief is signaled by the emotion of fear. And this is the most challenging one of the ego's three beliefs to really get a hold of. And that's the belief in personal doership or control. So the third belief is I am in control. And it's the belief that me, this physical body, I am separate from the whole universe. And so I have to go out into this universe and subdue it, conquer it, control it, make it bend to my will. I have to go win the outcomes that I want. So I'm in control of life. And so that will produce either guilt or pride for virtually every action. Whatever doesn't go your way, you feel guilty about. I messed up. I didn't do well enough. I failed. And if it goes your way, it'll produce pride. And both guilt and pride feed the ego tremendously, right?
Yeah.
So anytime that you think you're losing control or that you don't have control, fear is the emotion that you will feel. Anxiety, stress, worry, paranoia. Some type of fear will be the response to believing you're not in control. The ego does not like to not be in control because it believes that it is in control. So the belief in personal doership is like the most pervasive of the ego's beliefs in that it's the most difficult to question. It's easier to get somebody to question the belief in lack, that, hey, maybe lack is just an illusion in the mind, but it's not actually true, that you have at your own disposal every resource you need. Everything you could ever ask for is available to you. You just have to attract it and go out and get it, right? most people would say, that's tough, but I can get behind that. But if you tell somebody you're not the doer of your own actions, they're just like, that's the craziest idea I've ever heard. Of course I'm the doer of my actions. I want to pick that water bottle up. I just did it. I just proved you wrong. And so it's a much more philosophical belief to unravel, because you have to get into the nature of oneness, and that there is no separation from life. And so there is no individual person who can act apart from life. So ultimately, what we're saying is that all actions are God's. All actions are the universe in motion. And it looks like a person is doing it, just like when an actor wears a costume on the stage. You see like Barney for a kid's show, and there's some dude inside the Barney costume acting like Barney. So to all the kids, it looks like Barney. Barney's in there acting. Barney's the one talking to us. But really, there's a man inside the costume who isn't Barney doing the actions. And that's what it's like to be a person, is that you think that there's some kind of separate, personal, individual self inside this bag of skin, and there's nothing but the universe itself playing the disguise of Aaron Abke. And so every action that Aaron appears to do is really just the laws of the universe, karma, etc., acting through me. And my karma is always playing out. My conditioning is always playing out. I'm always acting according to my character's script. And so the Buddha famously said, actions happen and deeds are done, but there is no individual doer thereof. So it's this idea that you're connected to the cosmos all around you, and every decision you make is influenced by outside forces that you are one with, but as living as a body, you don't perceive it, right? When you feel hungry, you just say, I'm hungry. But it's like, well, when did you make the choice to go from not hungry to hungry? Where's the button you press to choose to be hungry?
Yeah.
And you say, well, I guess I didn't. I guess it just happened. Yes. And so it is with every action and every impulse the person has. It just happens according to cosmic forces and universal laws. We are being lived by the universe. We're not actually doing the living as some kind of separate entity. So it really eviscerates the notion of separation. And to get behind that belief and transcend it requires you to really step into the awareness of oneness and non-doership, and that really I am just the universal self playing a character. And so the character's beautiful. It's not to be negated or ignored or something. That's not what we're saying. It's just to see it like a beautiful song or a beautiful dance. It's a temporary expression of the creator, and I am the witness of it, aren't I? I am the awareness watching Aaron Abke live his life, be on this podcast, say what's coming out of my mouth. I don't even know what I'm going to say next, because it just arises within me and out of my mouth it comes. So it's one of those beliefs that will take years and years of going deeper into that understanding. But as it unfolds in you, there becomes an easefulness about the way that you live. There's a peace that passes understanding, that you just can't resist life anymore, because you know that everything is happening by the one power, and that one power is unstoppable and unquestionable. So you don't waste time anymore resisting life and complaining about what happens. You just kind of have this intuitive understanding that it's all perfection happening. And I may not always know what the purpose of something is, but I always find out in time. And I always find out that it was perfect and it needed to happen just as it happened. And so you just live from surrender and you live from flow a lot more.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I mean, all three of those beliefs come from the belief of separation in itself, right? And so if we're coming from that at its core, everything is going to feel as though life is happening to me rather than life is happening for me, because we're looking at life as through a lens of scarcity. I mean, that's such a massive part of it, right?
Yep.
And
You got it.
there's a quote that I don't know if it's a quote, I guess, but your favorite spiritual catalyst is when all of your doing comes from being. I heard that, man, and it hit deep, because I love that perspective. And I think so many of us, like you said, it's one of those beliefs. We think that our self-worth, our perception of self, who we are, our purpose in this earth is to do. But letting go of that and allowing ourselves to just be is one of the most difficult things, I think, especially for my audience, like type A kind of people, where we're always going. Is that something that you find a lot of the people that you work with is like, that's one of the foundational things that they have to let go of?
Oh yeah, that's the whole crux of that third belief. I'm in control.
Yeah.
Is understanding that all of your doing really comes from who you are in this moment. your state of being is actually what qualifies your actions. And this is not hard to see. You can think about, well, let's take a more dramatic example to really paint this picture. If you've ever done a psychedelic substance like MDMA or psilocybin, these substances radically alter your state of being, such that, let's say you do MDMA, and anyone listening who's done MDMA will know that there's this incredible feeling of love and connection to everything. And so, what happens when you're in that state of being? All your actions change. People let loose, they dance, they express themselves, they're super kind and loving with everyone. When you do MDMA with your friends or something, it's like this big love fest. Like, I just love you guys so much. You're my best friends. And it's like, why don't you say that stuff all the time? Because your state of being is different when you're not on MDMA. And so you can earn that state of being that you have to usually take a drug to experience. You can earn it organically through spiritual practice, through opening and activating the heart chakra. You emerge into that fourth density state of consciousness where love is leading the way. And that example can help you understand what it means to say that all of your doing really comes from being, who you're being in this moment. And so we really shouldn't spend too much time trying to refine our actions. If you have patterns, addictions, and things that you're trying to transcend, don't waste too much time and energy looking to the action itself, because the action is a product of who you are, right? Your state of being. And so if you're in a state of being where you feel empty inside and very needy, then you're always going to reach for the cigarette or the alcohol or the potato chips. You've got a need inside of your state of being that will need to express itself. So if you can instead fill your state of being with the wholeness of love, the satisfaction of love, then you'll notice that your desire for substances, your cravings, just naturally diminishes. And so the physical body less and less reaches for the cigarette or the alcohol, because you feel more satiated inside. Your state of being is more enjoyable, more happy, more light and free. And so the cravings can't be there as much. So all actions are the effects of your state of being, and your state of being is the cause of all actions.
Yeah. The thing that I'm so curious about when I was diving into your work is that you have not only Christianity, metaphysics, Buddhism, Hinduism, you've dove into so many different areas, and so you've expanded your mind on not holding on to one certain idea. And that's what a lot of this podcast is, just letting go of certain beliefs that don't serve us so that we can just expand our mind and not hold on to anything and see it as absolute. What has resonated most with you in all of the different areas and kind of laws that you've really dove into?
Well, I go through seasons, man, like probably everyone does.
Yep.
For a long time, it was the law of one, and then it was A Course in Miracles. And lately for me, it's been really studying the way of the Essenes and connecting the human Jesus, the actual person who lived and walked on this planet. Connecting him with the Essenes has been a profound alteration in my entire view of Christianity and how I grew up, because there was always this kind of missing factor in the Jesus narrative for me, that Jesus, when he was alive and walked on the planet, taught a very different gospel than Paul, let's say, taught of Jesus after he was crucified. Paul made Jesus all about just one thing. He's just the blood sacrifice that atoned for our sins. You just have to confess him as Lord, and that's it. But Jesus said, don't come to me calling me Lord, Lord, and think that you're my disciples, because when I was hungry, you didn't feed me. When I was in prison, you didn't visit me. Get away from me, you who practice wickedness. Okay, well, that's pretty different than Paul's gospel.
Yeah.
All you got to do is call Jesus Lord, and that's it. And Jesus said, nope, you got to do my commandments. You've got to live righteously according to the laws of God. Love thy neighbor as thyself. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. This is the fulfillment of the scriptures and the law. And so the Essenes were very, very law-based, but not Levitical law. As the Orthodox Jews, they were not about following a list of commandments and ordinances from scriptures. In fact, they said that those things were man's laws and were deviations from God's laws. Their laws were natural law, So, number one, living in alignment with what they call the earthly mother and the earthly mother's angels. So, they had the angel of air, the angel of water, the angel of sunlight, the angel of earth, the angel of life, and the angel of joy. And they practiced communing with these powers and living in alignment with them. And they believed that all sickness and disease in the body is due to man's deviation from these natural laws. So when you read the Essene Gospel of Peace, most of your listeners have probably heard the famous John chapter 1 opening passage, which says, "In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us." And that was kind of the Orthodox Jews, the way that they changed that scripture, that Gnostic scripture, because they were very like scripture based. So they believed like in the beginning was the Bible, the Torah, the written word of God, and Jesus was the written word. But the Essenes have it differently from the Gnostic Gospels. Their Gospel of John says, "In the beginning was the law, and the law was God, and the law became flesh and dwelt among us." So they taught that God is, like, God and God's laws are not separate. God is God's laws, and the only way to know God is to obey God's laws. So they had the 7 laws or angels of the earthly mother, that's the feminine, and the 7 angels of the heavenly Father. And through their daily communions and meditations with these cosmic laws, they obtained incredible physical health. I believe Philo says that the average Essene lived to about 120.
Wow.
And back in the first century, the average lifespan was like 50 or 60, I think.
Yeah.
So they were like doubling the expected lifespan back in the first century. And they were also called a word called therapeutae, the therapeutae, which is a Greek word for healers. And Pliny, Philo, Josephus documented very thoroughly that the Essenes were known as a community of healers where people would travel from far and wide to come to Qumran because they knew that these great healers lived in the Qumran desert near the Dead Sea, and they could heal people. And they did that they did practice the laying on of hands and transmutation of healing energy. But most of their healing was like homeopathic healing remedies, where they would teach a 7-day water fast with daily water ablutions and even water enemas in the river, and different kinds of mud baths and sunlight exposure, and communing with the angels of the earthly mother was their medicine. And so the basic philosophy of the Essenes was that they believed that man was created perfect and was always meant to be eternal, as the universe is eternal. But the only reason man grows sick and dies is because man has deviated from God's laws so heavily that we are not in communion with these vital forces that would sustain us forever. So they believed that we being mankind, had to back engineer ourselves back to our original state of perfection, which they called the tree of life, the 7 roots of the earthly mother, the 7 branches of the heavenly Father, and that if you can embody those 14 powers in yourself, then you will have eternal life. And so we have Jesus in the New Testament saying, "Whoever believes in me will not die, but will have everlasting life," eternal life, right? And that's because Jesus was, to the Essenes at least, he was the Messiah that they were waiting for, in that they believed that enough generations of the Essenes living in perfect obedience to God's laws, purifying the body, purifying the mind, purifying the spirit, that they would essentially upgrade the gene codes of the human being, and eventually there would be born among them the perfect embodiment of the tree of life, a child that was crystallized from birth in that state of perfection. And so they believed that Jesus was that child, and he kind of represented what the Essenes had been working towards for about 300 years of really isolating themselves in the desert by the Dead Sea and just practicing their pathway. And so the Essenes were kind of an amalgamation of Zoroastrianism and Buddhism and then yoga from the East. They were a collection of traditions, and they very much honored other worldly religions. But they had kind of their own yoga, a kind of Jewish yoga that was the Essene way. And so Jesus was very, very clearly, without any doubt in my mind, an Essene Jew from Nazareth, which is an Essene town in the Qumran Valley. There's evidence for it all throughout the Bible. Jesus himself in the New Testament Gospels quotes 4 exact Essene creeds, like known Essene creeds in the New Testament. And this is something that the average Christian overlooks because they don't study the Essenes. And
Yeah.
so they don't understand where Jesus got these rituals like baptism in the river, communion with bread and wine,
Yep.
the 4 different creeds that Jesus states. These are just things that they associate with Western Christianity. But when you look at first century Judaism, you're like, baptism was absolutely not a Jewish practice. Communion with bread and wine, not a Jewish practice. And then all the different creeds that Jesus lists throughout the New Testament are not Jewish creeds or practices from the Torah. So you have to ask the question, where did Jesus get these? And when you study the Essenes, you go, oh, there it is. That makes perfect sense. That's why Jesus went around wagging his finger at the Pharisees and the Sadducees, because the Essenes believed that the Orthodox Jews had so deeply corrupted God's laws and deviated from God's laws, especially through animal sacrifices. They believed that animal sacrificing was like the ultimate satanic practice, to shed innocent blood and use blood to atone for sins. They saw that as a kind of black magic, right? So Jesus was trying to reform Judaism back to its original state and rinse out all of those paganistic practices like animal sacrifices that the Jews had gathered through the Babylonian captivity and the Egyptian captivity. The Jewish religion had been so infiltrated from all the hundreds of years of captivity that they had wandered into paganism without realizing it. And so the Essenes distanced themselves from the Jews and isolated themselves in the Qumran Valley to practice their way. And I think Jesus was probably somebody who said, we can't keep this sacred knowledge to ourselves anymore. All of these, our Jewish brothers and sisters in Jerusalem, they need to hear this message. And so he went to preach that message into Galilee and Jerusalem, probably very aware of the fact that he would eventually be killed for it. But that was his soul's mission in this incarnation.
I can imagine when you became a pastor after seeing Christianity through a completely different lens than going to a different place where it was just like a completely different approach that just did not align with you. And I know that's the story of you outside with the homeless man. And I can imagine that there was so much tension there. Leaning into all of the different laws and spirituality, like things that you lean into, why do you continue to stay open and, like you said, go through different seasons? Because I love that perspective of, in one time you can be doing Hinduism and Buddhism and leaning into those, and then it can just be a different time. Like, when do you just decide to lean into something more when it resonates more with you?
There's no deciding at all. It just happens organically through passion and excitement. I'm just very aware at this point in my life that God is directing my steps where it needs to go. And, when I first started teaching, I started teaching heavily like the Law of One, ACIM, and my audience base was really heavily gravitated towards those teachings. And then I start getting really pulled by Hinduism and yoga and going in that path and sort of questioning it of like, maybe I shouldn't get into this and I should stick with what my audience knows and likes that I teach. And after 5 years now of doing this, I've just learned that whatever I'm passionate about is where the universe is pulling me, because there's no doer of actions, right? I'm just being lived. And so I've learned to really trust my passion and just know that whatever is coming through for me is exactly what the universe wants me to learn and to teach next. And so I've just learned to say yes to my excitement in that way.
Yeah, I love that, because I think for a lot of people that create content, especially, they need to be in a certain area. And so you being open to allow yourself to talk about different things, regardless of what you may believe your audience wants, it's like whatever I feel inclined to lean towards, my audience is going to follow me that way. And I'm curious for you, because I find for whether you're writing a book or you're making content, of course, the people that you're speaking to are going to get a lot of value from it, but you almost get more value than anyone else because you're teaching it and you're learning it twice. So what have you learned about yourself through the content creation that you put into the world? Because I'd love to know like how you've expanded as a person throughout that process.
Such a great question, man. Yeah, there's a fun phrase in the Law of One where Ra says, teach learning, like teach/learning.
Mhm.
And it's really the same idea as A Course in Miracles, that giving and receiving are one, that there is no true giving without an automatic receiving of that same thing at the same time. And that is very much what teaching is. In fact, I saw a study somewhere not long ago where they were testing out I think it was 4 different control groups of memory recall. And the first group, it was like, we're going to speak to you a sentence or two. You have to remember it and tell us that same sentence tomorrow or whatever it was.
Mm-hmm.
And the next one was, we're going to make you write it down today, and then you're going to write it down tomorrow and see if you remember it. The third one, maybe it was a combination of both. And then the fourth one was, you're going to teach it back to us. You're going to teach somebody else that statement. And the group that taught the statement had a way higher memory recall than the first 3 groups. And so it really goes to show that teaching is learning in that way. As you share an idea, in fact, the course says ideas increase as they are shared.
Yeah.
So yeah, I am definitely not lost on the fact that being a spiritual teacher has been the greatest gift to my own growth, because as I teach these principles and concepts, they expand within me in a huge way. They activate within me in a huge way. And then I, in turn, share that new activation with my students and audience, and that activates it in a deeper level. And it's a gift that keeps on giving. It truly is a mutual giving and receiving that I'm benefiting just as much as all my listeners when I'm teaching.
Yeah, I love that, man. Every time I have an author on the podcast, I ask that question because they're going to get so much more. Like, the book that you get the most from isn't the one that you read, but it's the one that you write. And I think so much of that comes with content as well. When we feel we have to have all the answers, but what if you just started making content because you want to learn it more and you're helping other people learn it as well from a lens that is where you're at? Because the challenge is where you're at is much further along than a lot of people just getting started. So they're not going to, might not resonate with you, but they might resonate with someone that's 2 steps ahead in this journey.
Yeah.
In your experience of working with people, well, what do you find is the biggest cause of suffering, whether that's resistance, attachment? Like, what do you find is just the common thread?
Well, that's an interesting question, because on one hand, I would just say ego identification with ego is the cause of all suffering. But this is why I love the 3 beliefs framework, because all suffering can be traced back to those 3 beliefs: lack, attachment, and control. And there is no ability to suffer without those 3 beliefs. So when I'm working with students, especially on my live calls in our 40 University group, we spend a lot of time back tracing people's stories and their suffering to what's the underlying belief that's fueling all of it. Because behind every thought you think is a belief system that is producing thoughts after its likeness. So if you don't believe lack exists, your mind cannot and will not produce thoughts that reflect lack. And of course, these beliefs are incredibly deep and pervasive. It's not just a concept that, like you can watch a video of mine where I explain why lack doesn't exist, and then you never believe in it ever again. You never think another lacking thought. If only it were that simple, right?
Yeah.
The map is not the territory. The concept is not the reality. You have to really dig deep in yourself every day and do that inner excavation of your belief system. And really that happens through, again, the mindfulness of your thoughts. Watch what thoughts your mind is producing, because your mind is just a machine, right? It's just a default mode network that is creating thoughts based upon the subconscious beliefs you're holding. So all the information you need to know about what you really, really believe is being expressed to you in your thoughts throughout the day. And yes, they can be very subtle and crafty and clever, but if you can get behind the kind of energy behind the thought, lack-based thoughts have a certain flavor to them, don't they? That you just learn to pick up that taste, that flavor in your mind, and you're like, that's a lack-based thought, isn't it? Yeah, that's a limiting thought, isn't it? And you just pick it up. That's an attachment to an outcome. That's me trying to take control over this situation. All resistance to life is you trying to take control. It's you trying to stop the hand of life from moving and saying, no, life, I don't want you to do it that way. I want to do it my way. And those thoughts of resistance show up in very subtle ways. So you get better and better at this the more you practice it, just that basic mindfulness. But for me, it's just enormously helpful if you understand those 3 buckets of lack, attachment, and control, and you just spend all your time looking for those beliefs in your thoughts. And when you find them, you requalify them. You mentioned the one quote that I also love along with you from A Course in Miracles. Only what I have not given can ever be lacking. So the way that I would requalify any lack-based thought is to repeat that affirmation. But the key is you want to repeat it until you feel it being true to some extent. Even like the subtlest feeling of expansion, even a tiny shift in your state of being constitutes a victory that you requalified that thought. So it's not like the words have some kind of magic power in them. They're not a magic spell you just recite and get results from. It has to be a living reality for you that when you say, only what I do not give can ever be lacking, something in you responds as if to say, yes, it is indeed this way. That is absolutely the truth. Something in you resonates, right? So the feeling is the secret to shifting your state of being and requalifying your thoughts. So that would be the requalifying of lack, is to remember all feeling of lack represents what I'm not giving inside myself. The requalification for attachments, and there's no right or wrong way to requalify. You can use whatever statement feels affirming and expansive. I just offer certain ones to my students to get them started that they can use. But anytime you get angry or frustrated or irritated or any kind of anger-based emotion, you know for sure you have an attachment to something. You have an outcome on the pedestal. And so when you recognize that, the way to requalify it is to say, this outcome cannot give me anything that I want. The whole problem is that you genuinely believe that the attaining of that outcome will give you some happiness that you don't already have. And that is the belief that needs to be requalified. So the way you suck the life out of that belief is to say, this outcome, even if I attained it, would give me nothing I truly want. Why? Because all I really want is peace of mind in this moment. And any attachment takes me away from peace in this moment, right? It makes my peace contingent on a future moment, which robs me of peace right now. So the attachment to future outcomes is the loss of peace. And I don't want to lose my peace. So whatever the attachment is, it cannot give me what I'm looking for. And just that recognition is a powerful way to requalify any attachment that you're holding in your mind. And then the third belief in control is actually one I've already said, which is anytime you're resisting life, you're afraid, you're trying to control life in any way, the mantra that I give is, I'm not in control, I am being lived. And it's just to remember, as we said already, that it's not I that does the works, but my Father who dwells in heaven, as Jesus said. Of myself, I can do nothing. I can only do what I see the Father doing. It's just that reframing that only God acts, all actions are God's. I'm not in control of this universe. I am in cooperation with the universe. I am in relationship with the universe. So I'm here to respond to it, say yes to it, to flow with it, to have relationship with it. I'm not here to control it or to subdue it. So I'm not in control. I am being lived. And that statement, for me at least, is another way to powerfully reframe the belief in control.
I'm with you, man. We could talk about this for hours. I know that we could. And I love everything that you put into this world, because I think so many people, again, it's like, it's not that any of this information is new to us, and for some of it, it may, but it's just, we have to remember it, right? We forget it,
Yep.
and that is, at the end of the day, that's what it is. And I'm glad we're ending on beliefs, because there's one last question I ask every guest. And my question to you is, what belief are you currently unlearning?
For me, a really powerful catalyst has been public speaking and teaching, because I grew up as a pastor's kid. And, my parents were wonderful, and they were really great pastors. They were really great parents of a pastor's kid. Let's put it that way. I had many friends that were pastors' kids, and their parents were just awful to them. Just always putting pressure on them of, you're a reflection on us. You better shape up and behave, or you're going to make us look bad. And anytime their kid misbehaved in church, they would get really horribly punished because their parents were embarrassed and stuff. So my dad grew up as a pastor's kid, and he experienced that to a really severe degree. And so he made up his mind at a very young age that when I have kids one day, I am never doing this to them. I'm going to let my kids be kids. I'm not going to offload my pastoral stress and burden onto my kids. So I was lucky that my parents didn't verbally put that pressure on me very much, but it's just inevitable that it's going to happen at some point. And so a few times, misbehaving in church and getting punished for that and having them explain to me, you're a pastor's kid. You can't just go around doing that stuff because you make us look bad. And I loved my parents so much. So I wanted to make them happy and to obey them, right? So anytime that I felt I was disobedient or made my parents look bad, it was a huge trauma for me. And so I just had this ingrained pastor's kid attitude all the time that I have to be the golden boy. I have to be the perfect kid that can do no wrong. Everyone needs to approve of me and accept me. And it's funny because it doesn't show up very much on like Zoom calls or virtual calls, right? But when I'm physically in the room with people that are staring at me, it's like being back in church as a little kid again. And there's this pattern that appears in me of you need them to like you, you need them to accept you, they need to approve of you. And so I'll notice as I'm teaching that there's this voice in the back of my head that's, be careful, don't say anything wrong, make sure that they nod their heads and they agree with everything you're saying. You can't get them to disapprove or disagree with you at all. And that's been a really tough catalyst for the last few years of whenever I teach publicly, it comes out of nowhere. And again, I don't experience it when I'm teaching online. So I have to really get intimate with myself and find that underlying belief, which of course is the belief in lack, that I'm somehow lacking approval or acceptance, and only what I don't give can ever be lacking. So whenever I notice that belief that I need people to accept me, I go inward and say, no, I don't need anyone to accept me because I already am accepted. I already accept myself. And that's the first way I reframe it. The second way is to see that voice as pride and self-centeredness, right? Because I'm making it all about me when I believe that. I need them to approve of me. And it's like, wait a minute, aren't I here to serve? Aren't I here to bless others? This isn't about me. I don't care what people think about me. I care about serving and blessing those who are here for me today. And so if everybody in the room disapproves of me, but I gave them the message they needed to hear for their growth, I am content. And I'll just kind of meditate on that idea. I'm here to serve. I'm here to bless. I'm already accepted. And that's the way that I work on reframing that belief. And so the fun part is it only comes up when I'm in public teaching. So like I can't do it any other moment than when I'm about to speak publicly. So it's like that's where the rubber meets the road. And there's a lot of variables happening at once when you're about to go teach. You're trying to remember everything you want to say. You're trying to get into the right state of being. And then there's this voice that starts coming in really loudly. And I'm like, all right, I'm about to go on stage, but now's the time to do the work,
Yeah, absolutely. I heard you say approval is someone liking their projection of you. And it's like we could, again, at the end of the day, we can have all of the awareness in the world, but if we don't truly believe it within ourselves, at the end of the day, the pattern's going to continue to pop up. And that's why I like to bring that up, because we're always unlearning in some way or another. It doesn't matter where we get to. All of your links, of course, will be in the show notes, but is there anywhere you'd like to direct people?
Yeah, you can find me at Aaron Abke on any social media platform. And if you want to learn more about 4D University, you can go to 4D, that's the number 4, letter D, university.com.
Beautiful.